Communications.
Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
Happy New Year, Cindy.
Happy New Year. Do you have a special resolution that you would like to share?
That I'm not making any resolutions. How about you?
I think my resolution is to hike more, get in the mountains more.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to drink more Chardonnay. No, just kidding. Just Tuesdays during PRosé. But I'm having a delicious Chardonnay. How about you?
I am having some wonderful Cabernet Sauvignon, my favorite. 19 Crimes. I know. It's criminal not to like it, right? But I'm going to
bring boxed wine when you hike?
Bring boxed wine. No, but I did get stopped in an airport one time when we were hiking the Grand Canyon and we were returning. I had a can of wine in my carry-on luggage that got me pulled from the airplane line. Canned wine. It's
You're
not very
so
good.
bad. Does your mother know this?
She does now. Hi, Mom.
Hi, Nancy, one of our favorite viewers of PRosé. Just two PR chicks talking with our favorite authors while we drink our favorite beverages. And shall we get right to it? One of our guests and a friend of the show, we love her, Patty Callahan Henry. She was a guest on PRosé, and she said, Cindy, Vicky, you have got to invite Kimmery Martin to be on the show to talk about her new book that is called Doctors and Friends. Now, she is an ER doc and a novelist. Well, she's turned into a novelist now. She is based in Charlotte, North Carolina. And Doctors and Friends is about three friends. They're women. They're all doctors who have their lives turned upside down by a global pandemic. Now, the kicker is that she wrote this all before COVID hit. Pretty unbelievable, right? Now, she was influenced by the 1918 Spanish flu and the Ebola outbreak in 2014, but I'm so excited. Please, everyone, raise a glass to our best-selling author guest, Kimmery Martin. Hello, hello.
Hello.
Now, you're drinking coffee, and tell everybody why.
Well, I am drinking coffee. First of all, because I can't function without it, even though it's like 5 o'clock or whatever, 4:30. But I really lost the ability to drink alcohol after I contracted COVID in 2020. And it altered my sense of smell into this kind of disgusting, toxic reek. And I can't drink anymore. Most things I can taste pretty normally, but alcohol is not one of them. So luckily I still can drink coffee.
Wow. Thank goodness there's coffee. And you said chocolate too. So chocolate would...
I'm still on chocolate. I mean, I still have vices. They're just different.
So you wrote this book before COVID, and I know a lot of people are thinking that you're psychic, but you're not. It just all happened, right?
It was pretty surreal. So I had the idea in 2018 that I was going to write a book with an infectious disease doctor as the protagonist. So most of my characters are physicians. That's actually in my contract with my imprint at Penguin Random House, that my books have to be medical fiction with a female doctor as the main protagonist. So I had this idea about writing about an ID doctor and pitched it to my editor and sold it to the publisher and researched it and drafted it in 2019, which turned out to be the worst timing of any book ever, because we all know what happened in early 2020. And the book wasn't released until mid-2021 because the wheels of publishing grind so slowly. So for the last year and a half, 2 years, I've been thinking that this is just completely surreal.
And you get COVID.
And I got COVID. Yeah, I got COVID. I got this bizarre neurologic side effect from COVID. And there's this twist in the book where there's a bizarre neurologic side effect from the fictional virus. And so all of that was written well before that happened to me.
It's although the masks that were much more high tech in your book, I can say they had microphones and
uh-huh. It's kind of interesting because some of the stuff in the book turned out to be, eerily accurate in terms of what happened in our own real life plague, but some of the stuff is completely different. And so, it's kind of interesting looking back on it now to see the things that I thought would happen when I imagined a pandemic versus the things that actually happened. So, it's sort of this what might have been tale.
Right. Like in your book, Doctors and Friends, we have a female president and the country is pretty much united. And we find ourselves today pretty much divided.
Yeah, I actually used that example as why the book is humorous, because there is some humor in the book, actually. It's not entirely all grim, although parts of it are pretty grim. But I tell people, yes, there's this very unified societal and governmental response in the book to this widespread virulent outbreak of a disease. And so that's kind of funny, right? But there is this female president who's very scientifically minded and very compassionate, and actually sort of modeled her on a real life person.
And who?
Oh, really?
Well, I named her President Corbett, and if you follow epidemiology and infectious disease and virology, which more people do now than did previously, there's a very well-known scientist named Kizzy Corbett. She's a PhD at Harvard, but she was with the NIH, and she's one of the people who was working on the development of coronavirus mRNA vaccines well before we had the COVID pandemic. And so she's really instrumental in the fact that the vaccines were produced as quickly as they were.
I feel terrible. I did not know her. Did you, Cindy?
No, I'm sorry.
Well, tell us what your thoughts are about the current real life situation of healthcare.
Oh, well, I'm in a lot of groups online on Facebook and on other platforms with physicians and medical providers. And I mean, it's so hard right now to be an ER doctor or an ER nurse or an ICU doctor or nurse or an infectious disease doctor or nurse. They're getting literally hammered with an unimaginably difficult recurring nightmare. People just keep coming in and coming in and coming in and coming in, and the vast majority of all the sick people are unvaccinated. And it's Groundhog Day. You can't at this point persuade people, for the most part, to protect themselves. And so they're seeing this over and over and over and over and over again, and it's so hard.
How do you think this turned into a political issue instead of a health issue?
I mean, there's like at least several dozen sociologic books on that topic probably by now. And it'll be I think a study of discussion and evaluation for decades, because it's so strange, really, when you think about it, some of the beliefs that arose related to the pandemic and how divided we became. And, the whole thing is interesting from a sociologic perspective, but not really while you're living it, I do think that probably the key to becoming more unified is to listen to each other and to address people's legitimate concerns and not be snarky and disdainful. But, there's so much going on there.
Mm-hmm. I actually told Vicki, I said, one of the things I love is it felt like Friends, but via doctors, right? So you've got the women from the different backgrounds, and they maintained their connection. So there was this sense of personal life beyond the pandemic. Even though they're involved in such hypercritical things, at the end of the day, they're going home to a sassy daughter and a job that they love and that they put their heart into. So
yeah, and so this is my third novel, my third work of medical fiction. And my original idea when I thought, hey, I'm going to try to write a novel, was to write about the really intense camaraderie that develops with the people that you do your medical training with. So in my real life, I have this devoted group of girlfriends. There's 7 of us from medical school. And we live in different places, but we still and we still go on trips together, and they're my ride or die people. And in fact, I actually took a trip with them to Spain and Morocco, where parts of the novel are set in 2019 in real life. And so this group of friends was sort of the inspiration for the idea of writing novels about women doctors.
Oh, so did they know they were in the book?
So I have to say, they don't correlate directly with the characters. Nobody is like completely represented by a character, but there are things in all of the books, little anecdotes and little personality traits and stuff that do relate to real life experience, but there's a real heavy dose of fiction in there too.
And do you identify with any character in particular?
Well, I think I'm kind of a mixture of Zadie from my first novel, The Queen of Hearts, and a little bit of Kira from Doctors and Friends. Maybe those two the most. And Compton also. She's the ER doctor in Doctors and Friends. And of course, that one was kind of a natural feeling role for me to write. I didn't have to strain too hard to think of what it's like to be an ER doctor, but some of the other characters were a lot of work.
Did you ever wear the lab coat home at the end of the day, like Compton did?
Oh, where her clothes were too dirty to wear? No, at least not without anything on underneath.
Now, one of the other aspects that was really intriguing to the book is this ethical discussion and this ethical debate over how you're making decisions in their life and death decisions. How do you choose between one dying and the other person dying? And early on, Kira was reflecting onto a train story or a train dilemma, that discussion about ethics. Can you give us some insights into that and where that came from?
So that's referring to not a parable exactly, but it's this ethical dilemma that psychologists pose when they're trying to determine how people make moral decisions. And so the classic story goes that you are an old-time railway conductor and you have an out-of-control speeding train coming down the track, and there's a person tied to the track. And the train's going to hit the person unless you pull this lever and divert the train to another track. Or actually, I guess in the book, I have it so that there's multiple people tied to the tracks. And if you divert the train, it will hit one person. And so you're asking one person to save the multiple people in the first scenario. And so when psychologists pose that dilemma to people, they usually opt to save the most number of people. But then they throw in all these permutations to kind of make it more interesting. All right, now you're not a train conductor anymore. You're an onlooker, and you have to shove somebody onto the tracks to save the 5 people. And that they don't choose to make an active choice to sacrifice somebody. And so in the book, the final scenario posed by the main character is she realizes in this hypothetical situation that the person tied to the tracks that the train is currently on is her own child. And so she thinks, of course, it doesn't matter how many people are on the other track. This is where biology overwhelms logic, and I'm going to save my child. But then she realizes on the other track is her other child. Oh, whoops. I don't know. I thought I had my phone turned off. Sorry. So the basic dilemma in the book is the infectious disease doctor this American response to the virus. Near the end of the pandemic, both of her children become deathly ill. Access to one dose of an experimental antiviral medication, and she can only give it to one child. And I know that sounds really far-fetched, but I actually based it on a real-life scenario, actually kind of two real-life scenarios that I read about or heard about. So when COVID happened, my editor was really reluctant about whether or not we should go forth with the publication of this book, and particularly whether we should go forth with that being the central dilemma of the book.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Heavy, Kimmery.
Yeah. So like I said, there is some humor in there because that is heavy. You know, you got
that sounds like a laugh riot.
Yeah, it's hilarious. I'm telling you.
Now you're getting rave reviews for it, but we know a little bit about you and your background. I know that you love libraries and you love reading. So first I want to know how you switched gears from being an ER doctor to a novelist. And my second question is, if you could sit in a library and have a conversation with your favorite authors, who would they be? And if it could be in any library in the world, what library would it be?
Ooh, that is a great question. All right. I'll answer the library question first. I would pick the library in Alexandria, Egypt, which is supposed to be one of the most amazing structures on earth when it comes to, bibliophiles. And I would pick Bill Bryson, the author, to chat with. He's my favorite writer. He's a nonfiction writer of travel and science and engineering and history. He's this brilliant, brilliant guy who cannot write a boring sentence. And that's the person I would most like to pick his brain.
Okay.
I bet you haven't gotten either of those answers before.
And now about your journey into becoming a novelist.
Well, I am a huge book nerd. I love reading, just like you guys do. So it's been this, this great joy throughout my life. And I kind of just thought, I want to try doing the thing that has given me so much joy when other people do it, and that's writing. And I've always been kind of a word nerd. I like the idea of language and storytelling and all of that stuff. And so I decided to try it about maybe 8 years ago now.
So you're just 8 years in and you've got 3 novels already.
Well, it took me a long time to get the first one published. Actually, it took a long time to get representation by a literary agent. I was really bad at that part. And then once that book was published in 2018, it kind of picked up.
So now you've already said that you've got it in your contract that you have to write about medicine. So your next book obviously is about medicine. Where do you go from here?
Well, it's not going to be about a pandemic. It's going to be about something really good, like world peace. So it's funny you asked that. I just got back to writing on my new manuscript. November. So I was doing a book tour and a lot of promotional stuff, and then the holidays, and then my kids went back to school this weekend. Blow for freedom. I'm finally writing again. And I think this next novel will be pretty different from my previous 3. The main character is still going to be a female doctor, and she's going to be an orthopedic surgeon. But I'm also going to tell things from the point of view of her husband.
Is this about your husband?
Not my husband. My husband actually is an orthopedic surgeon, so I guess he's the wife in this book.
Okay.
I'm definitely crowdsourcing him for the OR scenes. But there's this big secret in the marriage between these two people, and they have a very devoted, very loving marriage, but one of them is hiding an enormous, fundamental, life-altering secret from the other one.
Oh my!
Whoa. I can't wait.
So hopefully that is not reality.
So 2 doctors in the house. Wow.
And do you still practice medicine, or are you full-time writer at this point?
Pretty much full-time writer. I do volunteer and have volunteered for the last year, but I I kind of gradually morphed away from full-time in the emergency department, which is, as you can imagine, kind of a wrenching, difficult job, especially in terms of hours, because, I mean, think about it, the ER is always open. So they work nights, weekends, holidays, birthdays, every possible life event you could want to attend is usually, conflicting with one of your shifts. And so I gradually went to part-time, and I have 3 kids, so it's, difficult to sustain full-time forever in ER. So I went to part-time, and then as my first novel was getting published, I got offered a job in an allergy clinic in one of the big downtown banks in Charlotte, and they wanted an ER doctor on site in case anyone had an anaphylactic reaction to an allergy shot. So I was getting paid to sit in a little room.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And just watch. I watch you. Yes. Nice. I think we all earn our dues at some point. So, all of the time you spent in the ER, there has to be a fantastic story, like just something emotionally beautiful that came out of the ER. What was the best story learned from your days in the ER?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because usually it's kind of the inverse of that question, and people want to know, like, what's the weirdest thing I've ever extracted from someone or whatever. Usually their minds are going in a totally different direction, but you took the high road and asked about something beautiful. There's so many. It's kind of rare in the emergency department that anybody ever comes back and thanks you, for obvious reasons. You're not just hanging out at the ER when you don't have to be there. Unlike with your primary care doctor or your beloved pediatrician or your oncologist or, the doctors that you see over and over again. An older gentleman come back to the emergency department maybe a month or 2 after he had been there as a patient. And he came in basically dead, had to be resuscitated. He got put into a hypothermic coma, and he came back a few months later and gave me this big hug and was crying. And of course, he didn't remember being there, but his family had told him about it. And so I think that's probably, the proudest, sweetest moment of my entire life, was seeing him walk back in.
Oh, wow.
How long ago was that?
It's probably 10 years ago.
Do you keep in contact, or is that it? One and done?
I didn't ask for his contact information, but there were a few patients over the years who took the trouble to track me down and send me a note or a letter, or sometimes they would send me books. And, so occasionally, I would get to hear the follow-up stories of people who had left. But most of the time after they were either discharged from the hospital or whatever, I didn't know what happened after that.
And you talked to a lot of experts when you wrote this book, your latest book, Doctors and Friends. I read another novel that was about COVID, but it was fiction too. And it had characters that in real life, I found out, they had almost these real life experiences in a dream form, but swear it really happened to them. Did you talk to anybody with any stories like that in all your research?
People who experienced in real life.
When they were on ventilators. I'm sorry, I should have said that. They were on ventilators. When they came back, they said, oh, well, this and this and this happened. And people would tell them, no, you've been in a hospital for a month or whatever it might be. And they swore that they had these experiences that they said were more clear than just a dream.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I have read about that, but I've not personally experienced anyone saying that. But I think it's very, very interesting what the human subconscious is capable of, and what our brain, how our brains process things when we're not fully aware of it.
Do you think we're going to get out of this in 2023? I mean, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but you did write a book about it before it happened. So maybe.
Yeah, I know. I've basically been kind of mired in my own personal pandemic since 2019. and as you say, I did interview a number of, probably 40 infectious disease doctors, epidemiologists, virologists. I read a lot of journal articles and books. And even, even the most expert among us have been fairly baffled by some of the turns that COVID has taken. It's been a really different kind of virus than what a lot of people were expecting, both clinically and in terms of its epidemiology and how it's functioned. But it is characteristic for viruses to mutate if we give them the chance to do so. And so I think probably this year will be a lot better, barring some hideous further mutation that is both more transmissible and causes severe disease. Barring that, I think we're going to be in a better place, but it's going to be painful getting there.
Okay.
You said 2023. I was like hoping for 2022.
I think 2022 will be better. Yeah. There'll probably be another summer surge and that kind of thing will continue, but it'll be milder, hopefully, every time because more people will have immunity.
Good.
I want to travel. And you like travel too. Has this kind of put a damper in your book signings and your events surrounding the book?
Yeah, so my second novel released in early 2020, just as COVID released. And so my tour for that one started but was canceled. And then this one, I actually kind of hit that window when Delta seemed to be ebbing and before we knew about Omicron. So it came out in early November, and I did go on a book tour. Some of the places, some of the events that I had, there were different approaches, but some were outdoors, some we required vaccinations, some, every place pretty much had masks. And so we got to do it. It was, I loved going into bookstores and meeting readers, and that whole experience is just sort of nirvana for me.
Because you love libraries.
Love libraries. I love bookstores. I like to joke that I was raised in a library because I grew up in this tiny little town in eastern Kentucky. I actually grew up in the mountains outside the town, and my mom took me to the library religiously every week. And then I went to the library every day after school when I was a school child. So I really did grow up in a library.
Wow. Did you read a lot of medical books? Because what made you... you must have, because you wanted to become a doctor.
Yeah, I did read a lot of science books as a kid, and that did spur kind of a lifelong interest for me in science. I didn't figure out I wanted to be a doctor till I was a junior in college, but I had read a lot of medically themed novels and a lot of science nonfiction, and I think that definitely spurred my interest in medicine.
And it wasn't anything like watching Grey's Anatomy saying, I want to meet a McDreamy?
Well, no, I've never seen Grey's Anatomy, but people compare it to my first novel all the time, which I love. I did read a lot of those, those Robin Cook novels in
Yes.
the 80s where, there's like somebody trying to kill the patients. And
Yeah.
I read a lot of those. I read the Tom Clancy books where the main character is married to this sort of badass female surgeon. I do remember being in college and reading one of those books and thinking, I would like to be a surgeon too.
See, the library did it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
See, for me, it was TV. I remember, I'm older than you. I remember watching TV, and the doctors that my mom would love, all the doctors were men. So when she said, what do you want to be when you grow up? I said, well, I'm going to be the first woman doctor. Because I just assumed if it was on TV, then it must be real. There weren't any women doctors.
Yeah. Well, yay. And there are now, I know that medical schools are pretty evenly balanced, or maybe there's even a little bit more of a female tilt in some of them. Mm-hmm. So we're out there now.
Thank goodness. Well, what books are you reading right now before we let you go? Because Patty Henry is the one that told us, you've got to read this book. It is so fabulous. And you were so gracious to come on the show. So give us some suggestions for future guests we can try to get on PRosé.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you. And I'm terrible at remembering titles of books. So I keep a halfway running list on my website of what I'm reading every month.
Okay.
I just put up for the last 3 months my list of what I read. And I think in that time period, my favorite book was a kind of a dense, big literary fiction novel by Chang-Rae Lee called My Year Abroad. But I loved Patty's book. I guess you've already had her, though. And Susan Meissner, have you had her? Her latest novel just came out in paperback today. She writes absolutely gorgeous historical fiction, and I think she'd be perfect for your show.
Ooh.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions, Cindy, before we say goodbye?
I just want to say hi to Anissa. Anissa Armstrong.
Anissa.
She's messaging you, and she met you in Davidson, North Carolina. So
yeah. Oh, thank you. The Nature of Fragile Things is the name of Susan's latest book. Yes, Anissa and I met at this really wonderful event in Davidson, North Carolina. It was so much fun.
Fantastic. Well, we thank you so much for being on the show. I sincerely hope that you can get rid of that taste thing that you got from COVID in the future. And best to you and your family. And we can't wait for your next book. So, and you're not telling us anything else about it other than it's coming. Do you have a date in mind, a release date?
I will definitely let you know. And Cindy, when you finish Doctors and Friends, you're going to have to tell me what you think of the ending.
absolutely. I can't wait. I'm about 3/4 of the way through. So
Thanks so much. Thanks everybody for watching. Have a great rest of your day, Kimmery, and we will see you all next Tuesday on PRosé.
cheers.
Thank you, guys.
Join us next week for another edition of PRosé with Vicki Locke and Cindy Woolley from C2 Communications.